Hello, welcome to Be With the Word. I am Dr. Gerry Crete. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Atlanta, Georgia.
I'm Dr. Peter Malinowski, clinical psychologist in Indianapolis, Indiana.
And we're so excited to be with you today. And we are going to look at the Sunday readings. If you haven't heard them already, check us out at Hear the Word. We'll read where we read them to you. And also, you can read them yourself, of course, and you can go to the Catholic Bishop site and they have them online too. But after you've read them, or join us and we will have our reflection. And this is going to be a good one because we are looking at how psychology kind of gets it wrong when it comes to true happiness. So I'm excited to get into that discussion in just a few minutes with Dr. Peter. Hey, Dr. Peter, how are you doing today?
I am doing really well. This is I really enjoy this time, Jerry. Like Dr. Jerry, being with you, diving into the Word. We're looking at the readings for the 13th Sunday of Ordinary Time in Cycle A,
Mhm.
and they are so rich. It's just a real blessing to be able to go through these with you and to really pull out the psychological implications, the stuff that you won't usually hear in the sermons or the homilies at Sunday Mass, that you won't necessarily pick up from spiritual reading. That's what we're all about, and that really gets me charged up.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
super excited to hear your insights about these
And
readings too.
yes. And by the way, on a totally unrelated note, I finally got a haircut. So this is the first post-pandemic haircut that I was able to get just the other day. So I didn't have it totally short, but it's definitely a little bit cleaned up. So I'm feeling lighter and enjoying a little more interaction with human beings. Carefully, but still enjoying that. So but yeah, no, these readings are actually kind of challenging and interesting
Hmm.
all at once. And it's funny when I think about secular psychology. Sometimes we'll say person centered or humanistic or Rogerian for anybody that's into that is a major thrust in a lot of the mental health, clinical counseling and so on, is a focus on good things, really, like just having positive regard for your clients or patients and being kind of hopeful and non-judgmental and all of that, and but it isn't actually in total accord with the real message of the gospel, and certainly not in total accord with what we see in these readings, which
Well,
are
and not,
really
not
challenging.
Yeah, and not just not total accord, I would argue diametrically opposed in a lot of ways. I mean, I think there is a huge turf battle here
Mm,
between humanistic psychology and what we know to be true by divine revelation. In fact, I think they are in a lot of ways diametrically opposed. There's areas of overlap, there's areas where there is agreement, and there's a lot of
hmm
benefits that we can draw from psychology. But when it comes to this central issue of where do we find happiness, what does it mean
right.
to pursue true happiness, there are entirely different ideas about what that means and entirely different ideas about how to go about it.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's
exactly.
what I'm
And
excited. You're
so
going to be bringing that out. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So one thing that I think is interesting, I'm going to talk about true happiness. I'm going to give it to you right out the gate. That I kind of giving it away here a little bit, but we're really going to explore this more. Is that the way to true happiness is about serving others and living a life that is selfless. And another aspect is also fulfilling God's purpose. And we're not going to explore that today because that's just too much. If you really are interested in exploring fulfilling God's purpose, so we do at Souls and Hearts have a course called Be Called. And it's really about removing obstacles in your life that get in the way of figuring out your call and your vocation. So check out our website, soulsandhearts.com, and take that course. But today I'm going to be focusing on really this idea of selflessly serving others and and how that relates to picking up your cross. And so I think it's really interesting. And the first reading today is from Kings, so it sort of jumps into a different Old Testament book than we've been seeing before. And there's this interesting situation with Elisha, and he's visiting this woman from Shunem, and in this case, she actually makes a little space in her house for when Elijah comes by, he can stay there. So she actually prepares this place for him. And so whenever he comes, she wants to hear him, take care of him, and so on. So I think that's really cool. She recognizes that he's a holy man of God. So if even if she isn't a prophet, even if she isn't able to do the work that Elisha does, she actually, through an act of service and hospitality, helps him. And so that's an interesting thing. Like we can't all be counselors. We can't all be preachers. We can't all be pastors, but we can help those that are doing those work. And that relates to what we see a little bit in the gospel reading, where it says, whoever welcomes a prophet gets a prophet's reward. Whoever helps a righteous man gets a righteous man's reward. And so we know that our service is actually contributes to our own salvation in this way. And in fact, the rewards are pretty great. You don't have to be the greatest of greats, right? You just have to be a good servant, and God rewards that and blesses that, which is kind of cool. Um,
So
yeah.
basically, what it sounds like you're saying is that your job is to live out your duties of state, whatever those are. So for
Hmm.
the Shunammite woman, she was living out her duties of state. God provided an opportunity for her to care for Elisha. She took full advantage of that opportunity, and great things came from that.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. It's
that
beautiful.
yeah.
So yeah, so it's an act. Sometimes we have to look for those ways in which we can be selfless, and it's not about us sometimes, right? It's about figuring out what is it that God is calling us to do to help someone, and it all is furthering his kingdom, it's all serving him. And that might be a way to pick up your own cross. So I'd like to explore that more. I think it's interesting, though, the difficult passages we see in at the beginning of the gospel readings, though, are about whoever loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And the way I look at that is seeing it that there is a personal sacrifice that we make when we put Christ above everything else in our life, right? And it's interesting, in the secular world, people will do that in some situations. Like people will give up time with their family for their job. People will give up, sometimes, like for military people, will go overseas and serve, and therefore they're sacrificing their time with their family in order to serve this purpose, this great good purpose, right, of serving the country and so on, going to war, whatnot. And they're willing to do that. So what I think is interesting is, I feel like in this gospel, Christ is calling us to say, are we willing to make some difficult sacrifices for Christ, even if it means, not as much time with your family, or not, or some other ambition, some other, maybe it's for money, maybe it's for comfort, but we're giving up something in order to serve God. And that is a difficult message for most people, because most of us want our own. We want to have security, financial security. We're focused on our families. We're focused on ourselves and our own little worlds, right?
And that goes down to the heart of what you were saying before of like where is happiness going to come from? What does secular psychology tell us? And
Mhm.
what is our Lord telling us
Yes.
in the gospel, right? Because they're two very different messages there, two
Yeah.
very different approaches. And we sometimes we try to combine both, right? So let's
Hmm.
kind of break that down. Tell us a little bit, Dr. Jerry, about what your reflections are about those two messages and how they kind of
Yeah.
compare
Oh,
and
yeah.
contrast. You know
Yeah.
about
Thank you
how
for
we're going to
bringing
be
me back
happy
to that.
because that's kind of like the turf, right? I mean, I
Right.
got into secular psychology in part because I wanted to hear another point of view to what Catholicism was going to tell me about what would make me
Hmm.
happy. Right? I was trying to
Yeah.
find out the secrets of life, right?
Yeah.
And two very different messages. So I'm curious about how you were thinking about this as you were reading these
Yeah.
readings. What
And
leapt
you
out
know
at
what?
you?
I'm honestly challenged by this gospel as well, to be perfectly honest, because I feel like it really brings to mind, it's sobering at all the ways in which I'm secular, and I don't even always think about it, right? And that this message is not easy. Because what does kind of a humanistic psychology teach us? It teaches us that we need to be self-actualized. It means that as a human person, I need to reach my full potential, and when I reach my full potential in all ways, then I will be happy, right? And I think that that's really different than what the message of the cross is. Because the message of the cross says that in a human way, that in a secular, worldly way, I may actually lose things. I
Yeah,
may have to give up an aspect of my life
right,
in order to serve God,
right.
which feels very different. I mean, there's an element. I mean, that 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 when you live in conformity to Christ, you are personally transformed. When you are becoming, sanctified through the process of sanctification, you become more conformed to Christ, and in fact, you find true meaning in that. You find your real purpose in that, and that becomes just powerful and transformative. But there's this aspect of the day-to-day reality that you're giving up some things for that, right? Like, you could be choose I don't know, I'm thinking, what are ways that we do give up things as Christians? Sometimes that's our time, maybe because we're focusing on prayer, or maybe it's our time because we're focusing on some act of service, some charity, some project that doesn't give us immediate benefit in a secular way, but is building his kingdom or serving one of his children. I mean, in that line, and whoever gives only a cup of water to one of those little ones, that is an act of service for someone else, and yet he'll get a reward for that. Seems like a small thing to do, but a huge reward. But we won't even, sometimes I think we won't even do that,
Right.
right?
Right. Oh no, I'm thinking about people's jobs and certain ethical or moral dilemmas that they find
Mm,
themselves in. Sometimes, we may have to give up a position because, it demands that we do something that would be considered unethical, or
right.
immoral, that would violate natural or divine law. I'm thinking
Mm,
of, some of the challenges that pharmacists have, being forced to dispense, abortifacient birth control pills and so
hmm.
forth. So, I mean, there are times where the sacrifices to be a Christian are great, and I think in our culture and the direction it's going, they could well become greater. So
Right.
like as it becomes more and more hostile to traditional morality, there's more and more potential for difficult decisions to have to be made, between Christ and what the world would say would make us happy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, those are really difficult ones when it comes down to that, where you're having to choose your life, some aspect of your livelihood,
mhm.
and make those kind of sacrifices can be really challenging. It's interesting. There's that movie that came out a few years ago. I have to go look up what the name of it was, but it was the one that was about the priests in Japan,
Ah,
and I don't know if you ever saw that one. And they were torturing Christian missionaries, and any Christians were being tortured. And when the priest there had to make the decision to renounce his faith in order to save those people's lives. And I can remember, and maybe if we put it in the comment box, what the name of that movie was, but I can remember being a little bit finding that a little more challenging than I was comfortable with, because my immediate answer is, on some level, is of course he should not renounce the faith, and then the other part of me is like, wow, that was really brutal. So sometimes, though, if you really look at the gospel, it is kind of saying you're not to renounce your faith, right? Even if
well,
even
not
if it
just
means
kind of.
death.
It's very clear, right? It's not kind
Yeah,
of. It's like there's no equivocation about it. It's just boom, this is it. And
yeah,
and that's why the cross is, and later it talks about the cross being a stumbling block to Jews and a laughing stock for the Gentiles,
right,
right? Like it is not something that you are going to be able to understand using unaided human reason. You are not going to be
yeah,
able to get there by your own lights, your natural lights of your own human reason. We absolutely require divine revelation, and we require the virtue of faith in order to live out the demands of the gospel here. And it is
yeah,
it is a hard road, people, and we don't do
right,
ourselves any credit if we mince words about that. we've got to be really honest about that.
So that
So
is a major difference with secular psychology, which would tend to say find the easier path, find the way that would have the least harm to anybody, as opposed to um, do the thing. What we're saying is do the thing that might be a sacrifice, right? Because of a greater purpose, because you're serving God. And that is not an easy message, I don't believe. I think,
no,
though, if we could segue just a little bit and just
yeah,
touch on Romans, though, because the
okay,
passage in Romans is also really cool. And there he's really talking about um, being baptized in Jesus, right? What does it mean to be baptized into his death? And I think that, of course, still relates again to the message of the cross and true happiness, because again, the symbolism, right, in baptism, especially in the early church, it was typically in the very, very early church, it was typically adults that were being baptized at that time, and of course, it was done in full immersion. I think they're literally got naked, right, and were put right underwater and came up again. So the imagery was so strong of you're being buried. You're literally, when you go underwater, you're being buried and then you're coming up again and you rose again. And when you rise again, you are a new person. You are literally a new person. You're literally a child now of God, right? It was kind of a very powerful thing. And so, what does it mean to have this kind of transformation? I think that that is part of this message of finding true happiness. There needs to be a radical transformation and new identification of who you are as a person
that's
in
right.
Christ.
Well, that's
Um,
part of that whole gospel message is that this is not just a radical message about God and God's love. It's a radical message about who we are in relationship to God, beloved sons and daughters. That is a
right.
strange concept if you looked at, what was going on in the world at that time. I mean, people did not think
Yeah.
of themselves as beloved sons and daughters of God. That was radically different message. So
Right.
huge costs in a sense, right? Huge
Right.
asks for, or at least potential asks for sacrifice, but huge unimaginable rewards in terms of what lies in store for those who
Mhm.
actually follow this road.
Yeah, because I mean, those early Christians, right, were in the Roman Empire, where if they went forward with the ceremony, right, of baptism, they were renouncing the state religion,
Right,
which would
right, because
could
it
put them in.
required at that time, it did require sacrifice to Caesar, right? The
Right.
who proclaimed his own divinity. And remember, this is Paul's letter to the Romans. In a few short years, we're going to have Emperor Nero burning
Hmm.
Christians, lighting up the paths of Rome with the burning bodies of Christians. These were real and immediate concerns, the costs being extremely high, martyrdom being an extremely likely possibility for those that took on the wonder and the beauty and the awesomeness of the faith, in those first century times. So it's like,
Hmm.
wow. And we think about like the risks that they ran, when it would be so easy to compromise. It would be so
Yeah.
easy to try to have one foot in the world and one foot in the Christian camp.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I even find a little bit, I mean, nothing like what the, ancient Christians had to deal with in martyrdom and all that, but even as a mental health professional, things are changing and there's more of an openness to spirituality in general. But I don't think it's popular to say, hey, I'm a Christian, let alone a Catholic marriage and family therapist or psychologist, right? Like in
Hmm.
some circles, that puts you in a real negative light in the world,
Yeah.
right? And so it's,
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel that
Oh
sometimes
yeah.
back
I mean, I've
here?
had I've had people ask me, I don't understand how you could be both, a psychologist and a Catholic. Just the idea that those two things are incompatible. And,
Yeah.
yeah, I think a lot of times there's I run up against that kind of bias. So it is great to have places like the Catholic Psychotherapy Association where we can kind of bond together and we can share ideas, and it's great for me to be able to work with you so closely in Souls and Hearts too, because I think there's real an importance of
Yeah.
fraternity, among Catholic mental health professionals as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
but I think the world is becoming more and more hostile, because again, people are going with their own lights. They no longer respect. There's a lot of failure to try to discover the reality. There's much more subjectivism. What I want is what's going to be good for
Hmm.
me. I'm not going to take instruction from anybody else. There's a real anti-authority type of streak in people, and it's understandable because a lot of people have had negative experiences
Hmm.
of authority. But I think it ripples into, well, how do we trust anything coming from a real religion? And in
Yeah.
fact, frankly, whenever we have hypocrisy among Catholics or hypocrisy among Christians, that just complicates the matter, even more. So,
Yeah.
mm.
And to lighten it just a little bit, but I think this point I want to make is poignant. Um, me, of course, being kind of geeky. I don't know why, but I'm thinking of The Hobbit. And if you've read The Hobbit or seen, well, the movies aren't that great, but it gets the message across. Like Bilbo Baggins lives in a comfortable little hobbit hole, and he's very happy doing what he does and having no change whatsoever.
He
And
wasn't
that's
looking he wasn't looking for the adventure. He wasn't asking
right,
for it. He wasn't responding to, heroes wanted in the paper. He was
right,
summoned. He was summoned.
right. He
Yeah,
got a call to go on
right.
an adventure, and he was pushed and challenged to his limit and beyond, and it transformed who he is. And
Mhm.
I think that is a little bit the idea of this cross. It isn't just hopefully that we're going to be forced into some situation of physical, a red martyrdom, but hopefully we'll be spared of that, but you never know. But in general, for most people, it's about picking up your cross, is about doing something that takes you out of your comfort zone, that's hard, that requires self sacrifice, that requires a loss possibly of comfort, maybe even finances in some way, maybe respect or something. And we don't necessarily know where this goes. We're having to trust God and be willing to be transformed into a new man, because or a new hobbit, because literally Bilbo comes back, right, a different person in a good way. Really, he becomes somebody, right, who learns who he really is.
Right.
And I think that's the adventure for all of us. And if we're sitting too comfortably, uh it's not necessarily a good thing. And yet I think secular psychology would be wouldn't challenge that. In fact, it would probably promote as much as possible safety and comfort in that way. Would you
Yeah,
say?
I think secular psychology promotes what you happen to be inclined to. So
Right.
I think some people
Relativism.
might be inclined to extreme adventures, and then secular psychology would, well, how can you do that, and how can you do that,
Right.
thoughtfully and without, impulse control problems and so forth. But that's the problem of psychology, is that it depends on philosophy, theology, epistemology, and metaphysics to give it direction, right? And so what you're seeing, and why you have so many different approaches to psychology, is because there's as many different anthropologies that undergird it as there are clinicians, right? I mean, so we're trying to ground the practice of psychology with what we know to be true by divine revelation in Catholicism, but I think there are a lot of people, if you look at sort of secular humanism, that want to make the man or the woman the measure of all things, right? It's a very Enlightenment idea
Hmm.
where man is now the center of the universe, not God. Man is
Hmm.
the pivot around which everything else revolves, no longer looking at man as far as his identity coming from God. And so there's sort of these philosophical and and theological problems that have entered in, that I think have really
Yeah.
influenced our culture. And I think what you said before, like, we swim in it, we live in it. Blaise Pascal talked about this a lot in his Pensées, that we don't even realize how it impacts us because it's so indirect, right?
Hmm.
It's so subtle in the way that it inculcates itself into us. So
Hmm.
so yeah, we have to
Yeah.
we have to be willing to resist that, you know.
Yeah. No, it's hard. It's a hard message.
It's a hard.
I think that's really true.
And that's why I think this
Um,
passage in the gospel is so shocking, right? Because this is the very first time in chapter 10 of Matthew, this is the very first time the cross has been mentioned. And so when Jesus's followers hear, whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me, that's like mind blowing, Like, take up my
Mhm.
cross. That's the worst way
Yeah.
to die. That's
Yeah.
shameful. That's humiliating. You want me to do that? What does that mean? Right? So,
You know what's occurring to me too is as you were saying that, I was thinking too about secular psychology. I've been doing this research lately on examples of kind of whether it's counseling, mentorship, guidance, spiritual direction, whatnot in the church in the earlier church, right? And I'm looking at hermits, desert fathers, obviously priests, monks, different people that people would go to for advice. I know it's not the same as, obviously
right.
not the same as our current situation in clinical mental health counseling, but still people would go to them. And even if I think of someone like even Padre Pio, right? I mean, they may be going to confession, but they're getting more than just absolution with Padre Pio. I believe they got a lot more than that. And
Yeah.
so where I'm going with this is I think that those spiritual fathers uh, were not just sitting there and listening and going, "Oh, that's a good path. Do what makes sense to you and do
Right.
what makes you happy." Right? I think they actually were able. I mean, that the gift of counsel and the gift of looking into someone's soul, but
Right.
they actually challenged that person,
Right. Right. Right.
and challenged them to think about God's call in their lives in a way that was not easy. And I think people sought that out. In fact, right? And of course, these desert fathers and hermits practice asceticism, which is all about sacrificing comfort and so on in order to draw closer to God. So that kind of takes me a little bit to the takeaway that I was hoping to give here, or action item, I should say, for today in terms of what you can do. And I was thinking we all could do something that was selfless. Maybe something that helped others. Obviously, we could do an ascetical act of some kind, a self-sacrifice. But I was thinking more about doing a selfless act for someone else to get in the habit of serving others. I'm curious if you had any ideas of examples of what that could be, Dr. Peter.
Well, if you're talking about that, what I was thinking is, one of the things that so strikes me as needed today and is in such short supply is just listening. Just
Mm,
listening to another person and really hearing them, even if what they're saying is hard for you to take in. It
yeah,
might be a disagreement, but you're really trying to understand where the other person's coming from, not interrupt them, not come down on them, but really try to create that space to listen, which is harder than people think. It's harder than
hmm,
people think, because it's so tempting to get in there and want our own points to be made, or want to suggest that they could think about it a different way or whatever. But just to really listen, because that actually can be pretty taxing, especially if the other person is not somebody who you really like that much. You know,
right, right.
that was one
I
thought that
love
came
that.
to mind.
I love that. That's a sacrifice of your own, will in a sense, or your own
Right.
whatever your ambitiousness in the conversation. What I was thinking about something like actually go out of your way to be more conscious about letting other people go first. Whether that's I'm thinking driving. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if it's the same in Indiana, but in
Yeah, well, you're
Atlanta,
in Atlanta.
people are aggressive. They cut you off everything. And what would it be like to let people through? I
Mhm.
mean, sometimes I think in real life, if we could observe our behavior driving, if we could observe it of people walking, we would be embarrassed. We would be shamed at the way we are aggressive with each other. And people almost get surprised when you let someone
Right,
in traffic.
right,
So
right.
maybe it's that letting something in. And if okay, so there's that. I was also thinking if you wanted to take it to a much higher level,
Yeah, let's take
I
it to a
can
much higher
remember,
level.
yeah, like what would be financial sacrifice that would be something where you get no gain? Maybe if you have the means at all, but it's ideal if it's some kind of selfless sacrifice. But maybe giving a little bit of money to a young couple that is trying to start a family or to buy their first home so they could put it down for their mortgage. That would be a big selfless act. Um, finding somebody like maybe I can't be obviously a pastor of a church, or I can't be a preacher or do this apostolate, maybe because of my work or whatnot. But maybe I can give. in an anonymous or selfless way to somebody else, to help them in their work. Because in this gospel, it says you get the prophet's reward for that,
Right.
which
Right.
shouldn't be just carrot stick motivation, but really picking up your cross motivation, conforming to
Right.
Christ.
Wow. Yeah.
Sound good?
That sounds great. It's something that you can pray about too. It's something that you can ask God, is there a sacrifice? That can be kind of a scary prayer, right? Is there a sacrifice that you're asking
Hmm.
of me? To really take that to prayer, take that to your confessor, take that to your spiritual director if you have one, and really
Yeah,
see if there's something there that you're being called to do, because we want to make sure that these conform with what God would want us to do, and not just
yeah,
something that we might come up with that isn't so much in His plan. So,
yeah.
um, yeah,
I would throw out too, if there's something you're struggling with, maybe it's eating too much, drinking too much, or something, or watching too much television, video games, to make the sacrifice of not doing that, but not just for whatever gains you might make out of that, but also saying, I'm going to give up, let's say, television tonight, and instead I'm going to pray for this person in need. So in a way, I'm offering that sacrifice, that selfless act for someone else's intentions before God. Just a thought.
yeah, love it. No,
All right,
that can be really powerful. That can help with the
great.
motivation, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, listen, Dr. Peter, it's really great to see you today, and I've enjoyed. It kind of got dark. It was beautiful and sunny earlier, and I think I missed it. Atlanta weather at this time of year is unpredictable. It could be sunny and beautiful one minute, and then pouring rain the next, and then sunny again. So I don't
Yeah.
know, how are things going for you, and
It's
how's
hot.
the
It's
farm?
hot. It's getting hot. Well, we haven't had any rain in the last 7 to 10 days, so I'm gonna be watering. But it's been beautiful. It's been nice. Crops are going well here, so we're trucking along. We're trucking along. So
Nice, nice. Well, guys, thank you for joining us this week. We hope you enjoy, got something out of our readings, these rather challenging ones. I think we all need to be challenged sometimes. Obviously, by Christ's message is not easy, but we're here together to create community. I hope that if you get a chance, you will check out Dr. Peter's podcast, Carpe Diem podcast, and the adjacent community that he's created. Did you want to say any quick little thing about that?
just quickly about that, yeah. I mean, this theme of grounding psychology in Catholicism, that runs all through the Coronavirus Crisis Carpe Diem podcast and the Resilient Catholics community that's around that. That's what we're all about, and that's actually what Souls and Hearts is all about too, right? If you wanted to just get secular psychology, you go anywhere for that. It's all over the internet. We are really trying to make sure that we don't that we are faithful, and that we're taking the best of psychology too. We don't want to neglect the goods that are in psychology, nor do we want to neglect the treasure of the faith. We want to bring those two together in a way that is really harmonious and that
Mm,
brings us to living better. So it doesn't have to be an either or thing, it can be a both and thing. So
I
yeah.
love it. So check that out. We also have, of course, our weekly blogs and this show and other courses available for free, and the course for couples and pornography addiction. So join us for all this cool stuff in Souls and Hearts. We're so excited to be on this pilgrimage with you, and look forward to you next time. Until then, be still,
Believe,
be
be
loved.
loved.
Take good care.
God bless you all.